good. Oh, Vladimir's here. I expect some people will be thinking this is at 7. People are very slow to change these fixed ideas, particularly me. I was thinking it was at 7 as well, but greetings, Vladimir. I don't know whether you can hear us. Good.
Yes, hello.
Hello, Vladimir. Greetings. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. I unfortunately, Professor I forget his surname. AJ from Arizona. Yeah, his classes are now have been imposed on him an hour earlier, so unfortunately he can't join us, which is a shame really, because he was very keen to do so. Greetings, Dirk. Good to have you on. I know you can't stay.
Oh, hi.
Right. I will start after the first verse from Volusbal. We'll have a few moments to collect our thoughts and, well, I suppose not to collect our thoughts, but to let our thoughts leave us, those which are not appropriate for reflection, to sweep the mind of the debris of the day, so we can be more receptive to what our guests will be saying and what our own reactions are deep inside. So greetings, Tony. I'm just about to start. Thank you.
Which Tony are we talking about? Me?
Yeah.
Hello. Greetings, everybody.
Right, we're going. I shall start, as I said, with the Jag speglar alla helga kindir, Meri och Minni, Mögu Hendala. Helt kvöld och helig kvällsinier, hel natt och nift. För resa maugum, lite saker sinnig och gevet sitt om den svigur. Alle Asier, alle Aussinier, helt sjåhin funget och flod. Mal och manvet gevet okker, meirum morgum, och likeshand med den lippen. Brand och brandi brennens brunnen bunni kvekes der funner, mava av manni, verse at malikurde en til dalsker av død. Hail evening and the sons of evening, hail night and her daughter. With unangry eyes look down upon us and grant to the sitting victory. Hail the gods, hail the goddesses, hail the bountiful earth. Wisdom and wisdom grant us and heal his hands while we live. Flame is quickened by flame. A man from another man may become wiser, but from conceit may remain ignorant. Truth, like the sky, is above and beyond us all. Gods of our peoples and lands, may we spend this time together in friendship with you and with each other, and use it to the common good with profit and with pleasure. Hello. Welcome everyone to this blot, and especially to Aki, our distinguished guest from Finland, who, as I said, looks as stylish in person as he does in his photographs, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing him speak. So without further ado, Aki, please unmute. Oh yeah, one thing, would you permit anyone who has a question in the course of your talking that's perhaps immediately related to something to speak, or would you prefer till after that they speak?
Well, I will be giving sort of a less formative part in the beginning, and that's where people can interrupt me. But then when I'm sort of reading from my work, then I would prefer that people, if they can save the questions for later.
Of course, of course. Sir, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. So, greetings, everyone. I'm happy and honored to be speaking to all of you today. I would like to open my talk with a short Finnish loitsu. This is a spell, a magical incantation, often used, this one is often used as a greeting. Terve maa, terve manner, terve tuulet, terve tyynet, terve veen isäntä, terve veen emäntä, terve liekki, terve taivahan tuli, terve maan haltijalle, terve tervehyttäjälle, terve kaikki tänne kerääntynyt väki. I will begin with giving some short background on myself, which will act as a prelude to what I will be speaking about. And later in this talk, I will, in fact, read a little bit from my new book, Holy Europe, which is published in Finnish language this December, in the next few days, I hope. So my name is Aki Cederberg. I'm a writer, traveler, musician, and filmmaker from Finland. In my work, I have sought spiritual tradition as a living reality for myself and hopefully convey that to others as well. What I consider the essence of my work was perhaps best expressed by the otherwise rather obtuse philosopher Martin Heidegger. He wrote, "To be a poet in a destitute time means to attend singing to the trace of fugitive gods. That is why the poet in the time of the world's night utters the holy." I was born in Helsinki and went to Swedish language school, although we spoke Finnish at home. I am of dominantly Finnish descent with a large portion of Scandinavian, Northern European ancestry as well. And indeed, my earliest spiritual impulses and impressions reflect these ancestral streaks. My ancestors were priests and doctors from my father's side, and on my mother's side, seafarers. And so it is that perhaps from these ancestral lines, I have always felt a sort of priestly calling as well as the sea in my veins. I believe that we inherit more from our ancestors than mere biology. In the Finnish pagan tradition, the soul has a tripartite form. It has three different separate parts, three souls. The first is henki, the physical or bodily soul, which literally means breath. The second is itse, the personal soul, which is often thought to be reborn within the family line. And the third one is haltia, or luonto, which is an external guardian spirit attached to the soul. As a child, I was always confused by the imagery of the Lutheran religion as taught in school. It seemed alien to me even as a very young boy. Its imagery, culture, and landscape seemed very foreign to me. Then, on the contrary, I remember being struck when I was very young by an image of the thunder god Thor I saw in a school book on religion. This was a painting by the Swedish artist Mårten Eskil Winge from 1872, Thor's Battle with the Giants. Now, for a young boy, Thor felt like a god I knew and I could relate to somehow. And similarly, while seeing art from the late 19th century, which reflected the revival of interest in Finnish paganism very broadly and in a very mainstream way, I saw a world which I recognized as my own. And on a larger level, I have realized later, I always felt a resonance with the current of paganism that runs so strongly throughout Europe, whether in culture or art or language, or in our conception of the holy and of time, whether in the Greco-Roman legacy or in the old gods of the North, and everything in between these. So all these things I recognize as mirroring something already slumbering within me. And as a very young man, I also, or a very young boy, I've had these sort of impressions within me, sort of symbols and sights, and sort of these inner vistas in dreams and visions, which I've sought then the equivalent of in the outer world. And so it was that at a fairly young age, I was seeking the true spiritual tradition, sort of nourished by all the things that I was describing, the true spiritual tradition of my culture, and embraced paganism, both in its spiritual form and in its cultural and artistic sort of aspects or manifestations. And that was also when quite soon I came upon the real problem of all paganism really in Europe, which is that our traditions have been severed. We lack lines of initiatory tradition. Our traditions have been severed, and hence our sources are often secondary or Christian or dubious. The last rune singers of Finland died sometime in the last century. So where do we turn? Where do we go to find authenticity? And all of this in turn led me then to live with a pan-European sort of heathen brotherhood in England when I was also quite young. I think I was 18 years old. And during this formative experience, which was really very positive for me, I lived there for several months at a time. I also, these problems became even more apparent, just not because of the group that I was in, but just because of it became the living reality of paganism became more clear to me. The individuals and groups who represent paganism are often of a dubious nature. And again, as I said, they lack genuine authority. Their knowledge rests on book written in our modern time often and mixed with then, 19th century occultism and things like that. It's not a genuine line of knowledge, which would be taught from master to pupil, from the knower to the disciple. So this lack of authority and living lines then led me to seek unbroken pagan spiritual traditions, and India can be said to be a place where such still exist, of true pagan living traditions. So for a longer while, I traveled in India and sort of delved into the esoteric tradition, not to adopt an Indian perspective, but to sort of rediscover my own in its light. And of course, this is almost impossible for somebody who's just traveling there. In India, it is very important that you have a guru and that you have a line, that you have a living connection to the tradition that you wish to access. Now, I was very fortunate to find a lineage and a guru, a sort of foot in the door, who provided me access to this ancient world, which is really off limits to most Westerners, even today, I would say. I was given initiation into this tradition. It was the Juna Akara, the Naga sannyasis of the Juna Akara. This is one of the oldest sort of existing orders of sadhus, holy men in India. And I got an initiation into it and sort of delved into that world as much as I could for a longer period of time. And all of this then culminated in the Kumbh Mela. And this is the largest gathering of human beings on planet Earth for a religious or spiritual or magical purpose. And this is where these lineages of holy men make new chelas, new disciples. And this river that it is held by, the Ganga, by this river, I kind of saw the threshold, the sort of line which was not my destiny to cross. Because I found that my destiny was to point to the slumbering divinities of my own people and culture, returning to Europe with a deeper understanding of what a real tradition would look like or looks like. And all of this I tell in my first book, which is this one, Journeys in the Kali Yuga. Now, my second book, I have to take a little drink. This is my second book, Holy Europe, then, is an attempt to find the holy in our own lands. And this is something now I've been engaged in for the last decade or so. And this book I have been writing for many, many years, or several years now. The holy connects us with what is transcendent and eternal. Sacred places are beacons of spirit in our soulless age. But even though the holy is neglected in our time, it remains still the true center, the world tree and world mountain. Holy Europe is a story of a wandering toward that center. Throughout the old continent runs mythic streams of ancient tradition, which manifest in primordial sacrificial groves and age-old temples, as well as in shrines erected by fiery visionaries of our own age. In my book, I am charting the slumbering soulscape of Europe, and my journeys from silent graves to eternally wavering holy trees, secret coves and hermetic gardens, as well as the places of power of my own northern homeland. Holy Europe seeks a unifying spirit that would again elevate the gaze of Europeans toward the sun, the celestial world, and yet unknown horizons. It seeks solutions to the conflicts of Europe, aims to unite the archaic past with a vision of the most distant future, and finally it seeks to rekindle the smoldering embers of spirit to a flame. Holy Europe is then a poetic picture of our age. It's based on my own internal and external journeys through Europe over a decade and explores the mythic world, sacred sites, and spiritual traditions of Europe, as well as their meaning in our time. How can we approach our own native, often fractured traditions in Europe in a meaningful way? In what way can an ancient tradition take its form in a postmodern world? Who are we as Finns or as Europeans of any ethnicity in an ever more globalized world? Now, I can briefly describe just what I am writing about in this book. There is kind of, I'm exploring 9 sort of branches of the world tree. The world tree becomes a central axis of this work. The various cultures and peoples explored in this book are like different branches of the same tree. And this world tree, whether called the Irminsul, the Yggdrasil, or the Sampo, is the vertical axis around which the whole world should be organized, the true center and heart, the holy. Whether we view the holy as inhabited by the gods and goddesses, by the cosmic being, by the absolute, or by transcendent sublime beauty. So in my book, I write about the pagan revival in movements such as Romuva and Dievturiba, who faced much repression from the Soviet Union. So these are countries like, the Baltics, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. I write about the Germanic pagan tradition today, its legacy and its sort of historical burden, and its resurgence in the forms of Asatru and Odinism. And so I have chapters which include Sweden, Denmark, Germany, and Iceland. I write about still existing pagan traditions and customs, such as the Questenfest of Germany. Then I write, yeah.
Perhaps you could say a little bit more, because I think most people will probably not be aware of that. It's the image on the front of the book of the circular wreath on the kind of pole, which I believe it's not quite understood its origins or its meaning, but it's that relates to it's a sort of a totemic kind of Irminsul-like image, perhaps.
Yeah, it's a giant subject, and it's really something I put on the cover of my book because it is so central. It is this world tree-like structure, which is on top of a mountain in a little village in Germany. And it is really this sort of existing, pagan custom, which preserves something of the idea of this Irminsul. And this is really like a very, very, very big, broad subject, which I don't think has been dealt with that much in the English language. And I've really devoted a considerable amount of my book to exploring this subject, but I think it's really like beyond I can't really go into the details if we're going to have an hour and a half of time to talk here. I'm really sorry, but it's such a massive area. But I do write about this, so when the book comes out, people can explore this in the English language, as it is, as a historical phenomena, and also as it is today, because it is still, a tradition that is being practiced still today. I also include France in my book, and themes relating to the Grail, to art and beauty, and to Christianity in both its esoteric and exoteric forms. Because I think that the Grail is, of course, a central, if perhaps not the most central, European spiritual symbol. I write about or explore sort of poets as saintly figures, as the ones who sort of point toward the holy in our time. And this is I have a chapter about Italy and these sort of Dionysian energies which have erupted there. And then I have a chapter about Hermetic mystery gardens in Portugal, and an exploration of pagan and Christian holy sites in Spain. And finally, I have a chapter on my own native tradition, the Finnish one, explored both in theory and practice, including a year of seasonal celebrations and rites of passage, and pilgrimages to some well-known and lesser well-known sites connected to the Finnish tradition. I don't think there exists a lot of written material in English about Finnish paganism, so I hope I do a good job and justice. And this also includes many of these loitsu spells, which are central in the Finnish tradition. These are sort of incantations, because we have a very old oral tradition and still preserved a very large collection of these sort of oral written down poems now. So we have a huge archive to draw upon. And so while this book is an exploration of paganism, it is also a critique of paganism in its superficial manifestations, which really abound today, and which can be likened, I think, to sort of what Oswald Spengler talked about as this sort of second religiosity, when the sort of vitality of people's religions has decreased, and they're sort of longing for the youth of their religion. So while I consider myself some kind of pagan, I'm still also a very a strong critic of paganism also, which I think we have to be if we ever want to sort of build anything new. And on this note, I will in fact read a passage from my book, from its concluding chapter relating to this critique and the essence of paganism as I see it. Now, this is a few pages, and it's rather sort of heavy. So if there's any questions at this point that people want to ask, I can take them now before I read this little thing here.
I have a question for you. Go ahead.
No.
Go ahead. Bjorn. Yes, Bjorn. Yeah, just go ahead, please.
Oh, is the biggest thing you have against sort of modern paganism is just the superficial nature of it, or is it just the sort of anecdotal practices?
I think it's all of those things. And actually, I kind of describe it here in the the thing I'm about to read, what I have against it. But yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's the lacking of living initiatory lines, and just the fact that it's just it's so much of it is based on secondary sources, and it's just people sort of doing whatever they feel is good. They're sort of choosing little bits of tradition and lineage and heritage, and sort of choosing those things which suit them or please them in an aesthetic way or something, and then just sort of presenting them as is, and it doesn't seem very sort of deep to me,
Tony, did you have a Tony from Transylvania? Did you have a point to make?
Not a point, just a simple question. Your book is printed in English?
Yes, the first book, Journeys in the Kali Yuga, is in English, and the second book, Holy Europe, is now being published first in Finnish language.
It's not available in English.
Not yet, but I am in the process of translating it, and I am in negotiations with an American publisher about the publication. So I'm sure this is my project now to get it out in English as soon as possible, because a lot of people are asking for it.
I enjoyed the first book.
Thank you.
First book was very good. Thank you.
Yeah, I do recommend the first book. It deals with very important matters in a very easy, easily accessible way, I think, compared with Ashka Safat's book, Polemos, an earlier guest. That was an impressive book, but it was not an easy book to read. But Aki's book is, yeah, it's very enjoyable to read. So I would warmly recommend it.
I really enjoyed Polemos as well. I think we need different kind of books.
Yes.
And Polemos is like high theology, which is really necessary. I think we need sort of theology. We need sort of serious studies and delvings into the sort of theology of paganism.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That's not really what I do. I'm more sort of a storyteller and sort of I sort of try to describe my own experiences, and I think people might have an easy time relating to those things from this very first person perspective.
Yeah, I can see this. We might have quite an expanding general discussion. So perhaps it's best if we hear your extended reading, maybe, unless anyone's got any points, and then we can perhaps have a much more general discussion afterwards. Yeah, please.
Okay, so I'll read a segment from the book Holy Europe, and so this is a few pages, so you want to maybe take a comfortable position. A problem paganism faces is a kind of anachronism. Our spiritual tradition is treated as something belonging to the past, and it is being practiced by imitating its outer historical forms. The customs and beliefs of yesteryear are revived on a superficial level while neglecting their inner essence and failing to grasp that some customs have truly lost their meaning as the life ways of the people who practiced them have disappeared. But what is essential about spiritual tradition is not what is historic or ancient, but what is eternal. I have also sought a deeper connection and wider world of tradition beyond the merely tribal or national level. This connection I have found among the European spiritual traditions, which share with each other similar conceptions and customs on how the holy is understood and how it is to be approached. Europe is a family of kindred peoples and kindred spirits. Its pantheons are related. The pre-Christian spiritual traditions of Europe reflect the mythopoetic understanding and experience of the world of our pre-modern ancestors. These common features are locality and a connection with local nature and the genius loci, the spirit of the place. An understanding of certain places as being especially powerful and as crossing over places to the spirit world. An understanding of the ancestral chain one is part of, as well as a heightened sense of mortality. A cyclical conception of time, which manifests as celebrations of holy time and the seasons. The importance of heritage and lore, including the oral tradition of mythic songs and spells, initiatory knowledge, symbolic language, and spiritual culture, as well as an intimate relationship with the holy powers, to the gods or the divine, which include at its center the act of sacrifice. Modern man can seek connection with mythic reality via the aforementioned. Delving into tradition, he nourishes himself with timeless transcendent wisdom. By partaking in mythic ritual, such as rites of passage or seasonal celebrations, or even daily observances, man can unite with a higher order beyond linear time. By bringing an understanding of holy time into his life, he can become part of that holy time. By making pilgrimages to the places of power of his own locality or spiritual homeland, he can share an experience of these crossing over places with his ancestors. Through his heritage, he can break the isolation of the modern world as he comes to realize that he is not alone. Through ritual, he can call out for his holy folk and strengthen both himself and his community. By giving sacrifice, that is, participating in a fulfillment of the principle of reciprocity, he can receive his share of divine gifts. Many movements operating in the current milieu of pre-Christian spiritual tradition believe in the ideas of gods and spirits, yet few know them beyond the merely intellectual or conceptual level. By opening his senses and creating a space via forceful action, both internally and externally, by silencing the both conditioned fluctuations of the mind as well as the never-ending noise of the modern world, by seeking a pure, refined state such that a human being becomes open to the sublime, he creates a condition for the arrival of the gods. The prime cause, the unknowable immensity, the supreme reality or the absolute may remain outside the apprehension of human beings, but we can approach that primordial source through its manifestations. Those manifestations are our countless gods and guardian spirits. If we wish for the holy folk to reveal itself for us, we must seek to approach the mentality of our ancestors, an archaic mythopoetic state where our senses would again be open to the numinous. This requires at least a temporal breaking of the conceptual and analytical experience of the world and the modern mindset, which can be done by multiple means. The ancient yogis of India understood that a requirement for the revealing of the true nature of being, or darshan, the beholding, was a stilling of the eternal fluctuations of the mind through spiritual practices such as meditation. But during our dark age, other, more direct means besides meditation are also possible. These means include demanding or physically dangerous ordeals carried out within a sacred context, acts of overcoming oneself, pilgrimage, battle, sex, entheogens, ecstatic techniques such as dancing or ritual, all of which have to be supported by a spiritual practice and immersion into tradition. The purpose of such means is to create a more open and receptive state where divinity can manifest itself. To experience the might of the thunder god, we have to encounter him in the living world or embody his might in ourselves. We can know the eternal knower as we sing his song, as we seek the runes, as we wander in his path. We can be touched by the flame of the goddess of love and passion by making our being a shrine to her. We can encounter our guardian spirits when we invoke them by our actions. To truly know the gods, we have to erect for them a seat in our soul. In the end, what separates our native traditions from others is love. Contrary to many religious and magical traditions, where action is often based on some kind of antagonism of forces, in our native tradition, the holy is approached with devotion, giving, and sacrifice, although more powerful incantations are also known. The intent is to create a reciprocal relationship with the holy powers, one based on mutual giving, and one which we would wish to exist in human communities as well, even though that is not often the case. The holy powers are not strangers to us. They are our kin, our ancestors, and divine progenitors. When approaching them, we have a sense of reverence and, at best, love. As a child, I often gazed at the painting Birth of Fire by Akseli Gallen-Kallela, the leading artistic interpreter of the ancient Finnish tradition, given by the artist as a gift to my grandfather. It depicts a crowd of men gathered around a great fire, and in the forefront of the picture, there is a kantele resting on a stone. The kantele is the magical string instrument of the Finnish god and eternal bard Väinämöinen. Back then, I did not yet understand what the painting meant, but later I have come to realize its meaning. It depicts flame and spell. The flame is the timeless fire of tradition carried by the eternal knower and rune singer. The flame is both a creative and destructive force. The flame is what we want in ourselves to burn and in others to be lit, around the warmth of which we gather. It is not a coincidence that the fires are lit to mark holy days. The fire often marks the beginning or end of something, and that our great stories have always been told by fires under the stars. Gazing into the fire, we realize our own being, for we too are flame, a passing and but fiery flame of spirit against nothingness. The flame is the force of life. It is movement and dance. The flame is ecstasy, vitalism, dynamism. It is the opposite of all that is tired, stagnant, and still. The flame is the pyre of sacrifice and funeral, the fire of life and love. The spell is what embodies the fire of tradition. It is the first word of the eternal knower, the rune and the secret. It is what structures the world, creates order out of the primal sea of formless chaos. The incantatory rune singer sings with a greater mouth than his own. That greater mouth of the eternal knower is what our heritage gives us, the late children of tradition. In my own life, I have lifted my voice into invocation both in moments of darkness and light. Through the lower and higher worlds, in both sadness and joy, have my words rang out as devoted praise, as invocations, and as incantations for war. I have sung the spells both at birth and while ushering the departed to the beyond. I have sung as my voice has broken from the weight of the world, but I have sung nonetheless. The spells have carried me over mountains of pain. While singing, my own holy folk has accompanied me. The spell connects us with a sacred space on the sky of which the sun and moon shine simultaneously, and in which we are always standing protected by the ever-swaying branches of the tree of life. The last Runo poem in the Kalevala tells us about the arrival of Christianity to the land of the Finns, and how the old gods had to retreat, and how our soul was laid bare of its former rulers. With a heavy heart, Väinämöinen set sail to loftier regions, to the land beneath the heavens, but he leaves his song and kantele for the children of his people. While departing, he says, "May the time pass quickly over us. One day passes, comes another. And again I shall be needed. Men will look for me and miss me, to construct another Sampo and another harp to make another moon for gleaming and another sun for shining. When the sun and moon are absent, in the air no joy remaineth." That day has now come. We are the children left on the shore. It is time to sing. Thank you.
To say thanks for that is such a little thing to do. I almost would prefer not to say anything after such a fine expression of matters that are not easy to put into words. Thank you. I'm sure everyone would agree and look forward to being able to read that. There was so much in what you said. Would anyone like to put any questions to Aki after that, or to make any observations? One thing I did very much agree. Paganism for me, as a path to practice, seems to consist of two things. You know, if one was putting it in the kind of Sanskrit tradition, it would be Dharma and Bhakti. And in our tradition, sacrifice, duty, and love, as you say. It's not about creeds at all. Those two things are enough. Do what one is supposed to do, and give something from one's heart. And one immediately, therefore, enters into a relationship of reciprocity, as you say, that just gives back so much. Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, if I may interject, this is the way it is in India, for instance, where, you can, you are a Hindu if you're an Indian, basically, and you can be a theist or an atheist, and you can have sort of different views about the myths or the meaning of the rites, but you still participate in the rites. You do the rites, whatever your personal interpretation of them are, you participate in the pujas and these things. So yeah, I think you are born into that world, and we have kind of lost the world that we have been born into. So we are born into this void that we are filling to seek with ideologies and political creeds, especially in the last 100 years, and things which sort of have a religious quality, but don't really go all the way for me.
And in the current environment of liberal consumerism, religion is seen more as what one chooses to think, rather than coming from one's being of who one is. And as you said, in the Indian context, things are different. It doesn't really matter what one believes, it's who one is. And I think that's much more natural and consonant with reality.
Yes, and like the religion of the Nordic peoples, it wasn't really the concept of religion wasn't known to them in such a way, because it wasn't anything that was outside their their experience of reality in its all its fullness. It was just the right way to do things.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Michael, please go ahead.
No, I enjoyed your talk very much. Found it very interesting. What was curious for me is that I've had, and probably much longer than you have, because I'm much older, much the same experience, exploring the sacred places of Europe, going to India, because I saw India as probably the closest in some ways, or the ways that I was interested in, to European paganism, pre-Christianity and so forth. Some of my, and a lot of what you said, I think I would resonate with. Some I've come to different conclusions than, at least as far as the emphasis that I find, or what I would wish to make, than you do. All right, let me see if I can formulate some of my questions. You mentioned the tripartite soul of the Finns. I've been very much influenced by Ake Holtkranz's conceptions of the soul among North American Indians and the soul duality aspect. When you take in the guardian spirit, then that probably brings in your third aspect of it. But he basically, I find that if you look at various pagan peoples throughout the world, they tend to have this basic soul duality concept, in which you have a spirit that animates the body, the life soul or the body soul, but you also have what he referred to as the dream soul or the free soul, which is our experiences when we sleep and we're dreaming. He felt that the consciousness was part of the body soul, but then transferred to the dream soul during the dream experiences, as well as in trance, and also upon the time of death. My own thought is that if we merge with our free soul upon death, that free soul doesn't necessarily reincarnate, it becomes the guardian spirit itself of another born, a new person, whose consciousness ultimately will merge with the guardian spirit upon that person's death. So it's probably why we don't tend to remember our previous lives, unless we're really into New Age. But because our past is not our past, it's our guardian spirit's past, with which we will merge at a subsequent point. But Holtkrantz was very highly influential with me. So, all right, so let me see if I would tend to differ on your hierarchical. I mean, I love the tree, but I have a hesitancy to want to refer to higher and lower worlds because they have an evaluative kind of judgmental quality. I would think of the other world and this world, or other worlds and so forth. But to put it there's so much of it's so Abrahamic and Christian to think of a higher transcendental, and this is all inferior, lower physical matter. And so within a particular tradition of paganism, you have a Gnostic belief in which the soul is a prison, or the body is a prison, and the soul is trying to be released from the body. And I think basic indigenous paganisms don't have that aspect. So when you're talking about you're critical of paganism, as I am highly. I'm just curious, for one, about Romova. Where do you stand on Roma as far as your criticisms of paganism and its understanding of the gods and use of the gods and communion with the gods? That's one thing. I'm also curious on, you mentioned Heidegger, but I'd like to know how you would bring him in to your own understandings, because you didn't do that. And then the last point, which was curious. I mean, so much of what you're saying I agree with, but the one thing that seemed to be absent, which seems to be so much part of the contemporary pagan expression or desire, is this connection with nature. And I think the reason why paganism is being reborn today is because of the very threat to our planet, to our Earth, and the fact that we've lost this concept of recognizing the sacredness of nature. And so I didn't find that coming through with what you were telling us tonight. I'm sure it's there, but these would be some of the issues that I found.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, well, if I can remember, there's a lot of to say into what you said.
I wrote a couple
like a five-part question here. The idea of the lower and higher worlds, this is actually an essential part of the Finnish pagan worldview. It's not Abrahamic. It's thought that there are words like Tuonela and Manala and things that dwell within the earth, and that there are spirits that live under lakes and under the earth. And that's why often in these incantations, for instance, when you're asking for your guardian angel to appear, or guardian spirit, you are asking them to rise from under a deep lake, from under the sort of depth of stones, and under, like, there are these mythic worlds that are underworlds, and then there are overworlds. Like this is nothing that I put in any sort of hierarchy. It's just an aspect of the Finnish pagan worldview as far as we know it. And these often are invoked, both of them. For instance, there is a spell which I always sing. It's a song that I always sing at the beginning of a ritual, in which you invoke things, and then in the last verse you're singing, and now thousands of familiars come from the heavens and from under the ground. So it's like you are always invoking from both above and below in this tradition. Then I think you asked about Romova. Romova is a form of Lithuanian paganism, which has been sort of remade, and this was done at great cost to the people who did it. especially the founder Jonas Trinkunas, who was also, he was a scholar of Indian religion. And he did it at great personal cost to himself, because, you know, the Soviet Union did not look well upon paganism in Lithuania, in Latvia, or in Estonia. Basically, in all those countries, if you practiced anything resembling paganism, you were sent to the camps, and you lasted there for a few months. And that I write about in my book, this horrible tragedy of these things. But I do really appreciate Romova. It seems to be one of the most sort of vibrant and vital traditions that I see emerging. And I've traveled a lot in Lithuania and Latvia, and the way that it manifests in culture and just young people's lives and old people's lives, and how open people are to it, and how many people take part in these rituals that they organize, especially at this festival, this yearly festival, Menua Juodaragis, which they do every, I think it's August. You know, it's a very impressive pagan movement. So I have nothing bad to say about it, really. And that's really but it's an exception in the world of European paganism, the Romova is. There are few movements which would be as vital as that. And I would hope that we would have something like that in Finland, but we don't. And I have written in my book and speculated as to why that is. And I think one reason could be that, you know, after the Second World War, you know, Finland has been exposed to American consumer culture since that for 70 years. And the people in Lithuania and Latvia haven't. And so they've really had to sort of struggle to keep their traditions. You know, it's been like, you go to the camps if you sing these songs, and then they were sent to the camps and they sang them anyway. So it's like they have something that they maybe, you know, think is worth fighting for, whereas the Finns have been sort of entertained into oblivion, where we were kind of like, we don't think our own traditions and our own sort of native culture is cool anymore. You know, it's sort of outdated and old-fashioned and all these things. So I think that might be one reason. It's a different cultural sort of influence, sort of which empire you live under. As to Martin Heidegger, I really don't know. I'm more my approach to things is more poetic, and when somebody that obtuse, I mean, I have studied some philosophy in my youth, but I have to say Heidegger goes over beyond my understanding in a lot of the time. But I just liked that very clear quote that I recited there in the beginning. I don't know I don't remember the other question. Was there another?
About nature.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yes, of course, nature is very important in paganism. It's very important in Finnish paganism. It's emphasized a lot. And maybe one aspect is that, yes, we are seeing the devastation that's happening to nature, and we understand that somehow this spiritual path is connected with nature. So it is there, even though, you know, this is a long book and I can't include everything. But yes, of course, all the holy sites, most of the holy sites in Finland are holy sites in nature. So they're natural sites. And especially in Finland, this connection to nature has lasted for much longer than it has in, I think, other European countries, maybe besides the Baltics. But at least in Finland, this idea, you know, we have sort of come out from the forest fairly recently, as they say. So it's really part of it. And at the same time, I do think that it's important that we make a distinction between sort of nature religions and this sort of New Age sort of worshipping of nature, which sort of views religion in this very utilitarian sense, or spirituality in a utilitarian sense, where we're just sort of worshipping natural phenomena. And I think that's a problem. I think we have to have the transcendent aspect of the world also in mind. And I think that transcendent aspect is actually what is often lacking in modern pagan movements, and not their devotion or their appreciation of nature.
Or I would probably want to use the word mythic rather than transcendent. And I think that's one of the things that has been lacking, at least in our part of the world. As far as Lithuania, I mean, Lithuanians were especially the Jonas and Inya and that whole rum of a group, were very proud of the fact that they were the last Europeans apparently converted to Christianity. And what I found when you would have rituals like the fire altar ceremonies right in the public park, but Lithuanians don't react to it. You know, we'd all be around the fire. People would be passing by, but they never stopped and gawked at us. It was something that was just, it was too natural to them. And I found that very curious and kind of refreshing to find a people which were more at home with these kind of more ancient ways of doing things. But I also just want to say that I agree that Rumov is probably, I always thought that it was probably one of the strongest living pagan expressions in the contemporary world. But I think maybe you're being a little bit too critical of Britain and what's happening in France and Germany. Maybe the Netherlands, the Dutch are so atheistic to begin with that even though they have a Germanic tradition behind them, they don't seem to really be into that. I think for the West, or for contemporary Western paganism, that Wicca has played a kind of a midwife role for the reacceptance or the reawakening of most contemporary pagans that I know are not Wiccans, but Wicca has played historically a seminal sociological role. And then through all that, I find, like through the Pagan Federation and some of the ceremonies that they do, you can see something becoming much more, I don't know if the authentic is the exact, is the right word that I want, but something that seems to connect with something more ancient, more natural, more deity oriented in a kind of an open, flowing sort of way, but not artificial. I find a lot of the Wicca thing is, for me, it's a creation. And I think when you get into the Celtic and Druid things in Britain and some of the heathen things, there's much more of a organic connection to the past, which seems to be reconnecting. And of course, if you believe in the cyclical understanding of time, and if we start looking to our past and trying to reconnect with it, maybe even shamanically or otherwise ritually, we can connect with, not necessarily, we don't understand all the ancient rites, but we can reconnect and reflower that underlying pagan spirit. So I see it in a very positive sense. And I think some of the other European cultures, they're behind Lithuania, but it's still there. It's not to be totally dismissed. So that's my point.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Yeah, just as a sort of point, I agree that it's much better to try to worship the forces that have created the objects of nature rather than somehow the objects themselves. And particularly, it's important to have some sense of human nature, which I think is frequently not seen. It's just the external things, which obviously it's easy to look at, but we are part of nature ourselves, and the forces which form the forest in some sense have formed who we are, and that must be honored in some way, I think. Does anyone have any? Tom, please.
Thanks, Stead. Well, as I said, I really enjoyed Aki's book, the first one, I mean. obviously I went my own sort of spiritual journey in India, but mine was very different from Orki's was unique itself, but from many of the typical ones, and mine was completely different from that, because mine was less a discovery of Hinduism than more of like discovering my own ancestral roots about my family who lived 3 generations in India, and discovering their grave, the grave of my great-great-grandfather. But it was also very interesting for me to see Indo-European religion in action there. And what I experienced there is something that I already noticed is what's authentic about it is not just, as Orki said, like these, there's the problem with paganism is there's not a continuous tradition, but the continuous tradition among the Brahmins and in the priestly intellectual caste have built a very sophisticated metaphysical philosophy in India. But to be honest, the average person is completely ignorant of it there. And for them, the continuation of the flame is very much just the maintenance of ritual. And often people who become pagans now, their interest in paganism is all about wanting to understand the meaning of the myths, wanting to connect to the gods, etc. And I think what's lacking often is a commitment to ritual, which I think is central to that's the starting point from which religious experience can continue. So I found personally that the more I engage with ritual, the better that is. And while the Norse tradition is quite rich compared to other Indo-European traditions in terms of written sources on the mythology, it's very poor on written sources on ritual. So it is somewhat necessary at times to refer to archaeology or to rituals from other traditions. And I do sometimes refer to Vedic rituals, but I was wanting to ask Aki, from based on his, I remember the conclusion of his book, Journeys in the Kali Yuga, is very much sort of a departure from one sort of a departure from a path, but rather like you'd taken all you could from India and you were moving on to a more an overgrown path of paganism, but that required you to reject something of the Indian tradition in a way, not entirely, but you know what I mean. But what I'm saying is, what I noticed today is that a lot of neo-pagans are doing that and trying to integrate Indian stuff in, and I don't always think they're doing it very well. And I know it's a tricky one. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, about to what extent pagans can rely on Indian traditions to inform how we should structure rites, for example, or what sort of things you think were an obstacle or that might lead to a kind of Orientalist perspective that would be not very helpful for spiritual growth.
Thank you.
Well, that's a very, very good question, and it's nice to see you, Tom, and speak to you. By the way, we've never spoken, and you had a nice review of my book in one of your videos, I believe, last year.
Yeah, thanks.
So thank you for that. But yeah, I mean, I discovered that I couldn't go further on the path without sort of becoming an Indian. That was the problem. That I could have gotten a lot more out of that tradition. It was just sort of a beginning which I was given through my initiation and interaction with these people and with this tradition. It was just a beginning. I can't really say that I got very far into it, but I realized that in order to get farther into it, I would have to become initiated as a proper sadhu into this order, which actually two of my friends one was from Denmark and one was from Sweden did. They had the whole Panch Guru, 5 Guru initiation and became proper sadhus. And so they were given initiation by 5 teachers who give them sort of different gifts. And so they became complete, But that, of course, means a cutting away of your own family past and sort of cutting away of your own roots. And I wasn't prepared or ever interested in doing that. I simply wanted to sort of witness and partake in a tradition in which I could experience what a tradition actually would look like and mean. And I think, you know, as I write in the book, it mostly gave me a way to sort of be more critical of the European traditions, really. I mean, because I could view the Indian tradition as a sort of mirror through which I could view the European one, and sort of compare them and see in the ways that the European tradition is lacking. And but it's a very interesting question. I've never actually thought about that, or how to formulate my thoughts on the way in which European pagans sort of utilize or incorporate aspects of Indian tradition into their own ritual. But I have to be honest, most of the time when I see it, I find it quite, I don't think that it's working necessarily that well, because the Indian tradition is very sort of complex and deep, and I find the examples when I see it, I often see it used in a maybe a little sort of fawning way, where it's like it's obviously in respect to the Indian tradition, but it's just taking some aspect of it out of its context, perhaps not understanding it completely, and then sort of using it. I mean, Western and Europeans and Western people they love all the Agori stuff, for instance. They love like skulls and all the sort of gloomy sadhu stuff that are not gloomy, but the sort of macabre, morbid stuff that some of the sadhus do and engage in, and they sort of imitate that because of it seems sometimes a little juvenile to me. I find like simple Hindu ritual done by Hindus way more moving in a way and genuine than that kind of sort of imitation of the often the dark aspects of something as well.
Would it? Sorry if I've been mispronouncing your name. Is it Orki?
It's Aki.
Aki. I mean, could you give any examples of perhaps the inappropriate use of Hindu elements of puja in European context? Because I'm not sure.
I don't really think I should go into like examples necessarily. I don't really want to name anybody or anything, and I don't know if I would come up with very good examples on the spot. But I have seen it over the years, and I've seen it in a lot of these, especially sort of more esoteric circles where people have a very sort of surface understanding of Sanatana Dharma, and then they sort of express it in this weird way, and it's usually always the same concepts that are talked about and discussed. But I think the things we have in common are, you know, as Tom said, the rites and sacrifice and fire, and these sort of very primal things that I think are at the center of our rituals, or should be at the center of our rituals as well. And they're not that strange or esoteric. Just to get back to what Michael said here earlier, when I've conducted these ceremonies in a Finnish context for Finnish people, you know, we're talking about weddings and name givings and things like this, and there's been completely, you know, average Finns there in a lot of people, and they have had no previous experience with this kind of ritual, and they know nothing about what I'm doing. But as I've done these rites of passage and sang these songs and done what I do, it's very easy for people to understand what I'm doing, and I often get reactions from people that they feel like it's a coming home. They understand it immediately. And this is the sort of, you know, native thing which Michael mentioned, that something is just very natural and sort of, you know, it's nothing you have to sort of, it just feels right for people. So I think there is a way to sort of awaken these things, you know, in a way where Europeans from whatever nation they are and whatever culture, that they could experience that sense of home, and just of partaking in rituals that feel like they're, you know, mother's milk or something.
May I ask, in your Finnish acts of worship, do you, as is done in the Norse tradition, use a consecrated a horn of mead in some way and pass it around for a communal act of drinking? Is it something similar?
Yes, libations are very central in the worship, the Finnish ritual. There is almost always a libation, and you know the holy drink, the mead or the beer. It's sung about in the lore. The birth of the beer has its runes and its sort of mythic legends, how it was born. And so it's seen as this sort of elixir of life, the symbol of the ever-flowing forces of the gods and of life itself. And whether you are doing a solo ritual or you're going to a sacred place and you're giving an offering or you're doing a group ritual, I'd say this libation or raising a toast and having a symbol for this life force is always present. So yeah, this is a very common aspect to the blut or the sort of in the Germanic tradition, the raising of the horn.
And that, of course, is very similar to the importance of Soma that one reads about in the Vedas, which I found very helpful. Please, this is a wonderful opportunity for anyone to ask questions of our guest.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, Bjorn, please.
So like, here's a bit of a background thing, right? Like, I live in Alberta, which is like a small kind of province in Canada, but pretty much like 100 years ago, there was actually nothing here. Like, there was very few people, there was like no technology or society. And prior to that, there was like some French and like a few Indians. So when I was younger, I was like, hey, I want to find like a guru or a teacher or some sort of like continuity of tradition. But then as I got older, I realized like, hey, we kind of have to make our traditions, because say like, unlike a Finland or England, or there really isn't anything here that's thousands of years old. There isn't even anything that's like hundreds of years old. So like, predominantly we came from the British Empire, although some people have family that are like German prisoners of war. They were just like released from the camps until basically to get lost, or Ukrainians who fled Ukraine. Some of them live here too, but it's like we kind of have to make a tradition. So do you think some of that's just like just the nature of like how it is? I mean, it's just sort of like, this is how the modern era works.
Well, I think I think you should be looking, you know, it's of course good to interact with the living world that surrounds you, whether that's Alberta or Finland or Germany or whatever. But I still would look for those things sort of within instead of looking without. I think we carry sort of knowledge and ancestral streams within us which sort of inform us. Like I describe these things of how I came to these things were these sort of impressions which I had, which I didn't know why I resonated so strongly with certain things. And I was always looking in the outside world for sort of the same images or the same impressions or the same visions which I had already had internally in dreams and in these sort of, you know, as a very young boy, not informed by religion or anything. So I think we carry more knowledge within us, you know, in our sort of ancestry, for instance, than we perhaps, you know, always remember. So it's not just about, you know, what is in the external, what is in a place, but is what is in you. And then, of course, you approach the place with reverence as your ancestors would have approached the place with reverence, whatever the place is. I don't know if that answered the questions. And of course, this is a question. It's a very good question, and it's really a question of all people who are, you know, have moved away from their original homeland or are no longer sort of that much in touch with their sort of original culture. So it's a very modern problem, and it's a very relevant problem. And I'm trying to deal with a lot of these things also in this new book, which certainly aren't easy questions, and I don't even pose to have easy answers to these things.
Yeah.
It's hard because this is actually it is my homeland. Like, this is the place. I've been all over the world, and like, it's the only place I actually do love, or like that I actually do miss when I'm not around. So it's hard because I don't feel like, hey, we're European, sort of a dysphoria, you know, in the same sense of like when you went to India, you're not actually Indian, except I'm European, but I'm actually like here, like I'm actually from here. Like, I actually do have a lot in common with the people who live here, or the dirt, or what little history we do have. It's just, I think that you kind of have this like American materialism, or American sort of superficial, like Hollywood paganism to the South. And then you don't really have like any long standard traditions. So say like when I do blot, I wear an alb, but that's like, it really is like I'm the first one to do that here. So like, then I'll pass that down to like my children and their children's children, and so on and so forth, because it's just sort of like, there was nothing before that. In the same sense of like 400 years ago, hey, there was only a few Sikhs. Now there's like 25 million, but they obviously just had to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Alan, did you have a question? Yeah, if you can unmute.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to say it's good to see Ryan here. So I'm pleased to that my how shall I say, my my attempts to get him on board have worked. So good to see you, Ryan. I'd also, of course, like to thank Aki, I hope I pronounced that correctly, a very thought-provoking talk. As Stead knows, I don't agree fully with a lot of the ideas put forward on this group, but that's probably something for another time. What I want to ask Aki, I was very impressed when he started about talking about his own childhood, how he rejected, in his case, Lutheran Christianity at a young age. I was, as several of you know, I was brought up in a very staunch Methodist family, and I too rejected it purely from a point of view of common sense. I realized that for there to be a single, all-loving and all-powerful God was illogical and impossible. Then I delved back into, as I got older into my teens, read a bit about our, historical past, our religions, and I came to the conclusion that the ancients were a lot closer to the truth than we are today. And this brings me on to my question, because Aki seemed to me, at any rate, to be making the point, we can't go back and find exactly what our ancient ancestors thought and believed. Therefore, we've got to start from scratch again. But I think it should be an ongoing quest, that we should always be trying from one generation to another to link back to our ancient ancestors. I am, unlike a lot of people on this group, I regard myself as purely as an Odinist. Not, I don't use the term pagan as a what's the word I'm looking for? Just term. But I mean, some of you might be familiar with the Odinist Fellowship, of which I'm a member, and they have a regular newsletter called The Round Robin. And in the latest one that I received, it was quite a fascinating and, in a way, very exciting development. They have found a spindle, from an early days of sewing, which was inscribed with runic lettering, but it's been dated not to pre-Christian days like you would think, but it's been dated to the 11th, 12th century. The Odinic tradition seems to have carried on a lot longer than a lot of people believe. So I think somehow, as I say, the question to ask is...
Yeah, yes. If you could restate the question, Alan, it's...
Yeah. Do you think that we should be always questing to see if we can find out more from our ancient ancestors' history, from archaeological and findings, etc., and not so much to be interested in other religions from, not so much from other parts of the world? And I did like what Bjorn said. I found that very interesting. But from our own people around, no matter where they were. Do you think there should be an internal quest? That is my question.
Yes, I think it should be an eternal quest. The sort of figurehead god that a lot of people know in the Finnic tradition is Väinämöinen. He is like Odin, an internal seeker. He's always seeking, always wanting to go further and go beyond. So yeah, I think it is an eternal quest of learning everything we can about prehistory and history, about understanding the historical realities of our pre-Christian ancestors as well as we can, and conducting the rituals as well and sort of purely as we can, to which we also need not just knowledge of the past, but we do need some sort of religious or spiritual sort of creativity and vital force too. We cannot imitate phenomena of the past. And this is why I emphasize that I think it's very important to realize that the inner essence and the eternal is what is central to all of these spiritual paths, not what is historical. So there's no point in, of course, we should learn from history, but we don't sort of owe it to history to do anything just because it's historical. We live in this time. This is a very different time. And so I think it's very important that we get a full understanding of who we are. And the kind of paganism that I speak about, and to be clear, I embrace most European traditions of paganism, genuine traditions of paganism. I feel at home when I travel to Spain even, and to Italy. I can meet people of kindred spirits. I can feel a common spirit with those people. So all from the very north of Iceland to the sunny shores of the Mediterranean, I can find commonality. But I do think that the kind of paganism that I perhaps speak of is yet to come. I'm trying to dream of something that's maybe not even fully taken form yet.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Well, many thanks, Aki. I don't think we actually disagree. Yet I emphasize the past, but you're right, that is the future, which is most important.
Yes, thank you.
One of the things I was very pleased to see was that the chapter in the forthcoming book looking at Italy seems to be connected with the idea of saints or people that lead lives that embody the tradition. And I think that is absolutely essential, that whatever religion one follows, there need to be people that actually represent it in a life. And I was pleased to see that you had mentioned Ezra Pound, whose religious writings, though they're not very extensive, I was extraordinarily impressed by it, particularly his quite short credo. Are you familiar with that? It's just, I think, a child's guide to knowledge, and it's a succinct account of how one should relate to the deities, what one should do towards them, one's obligations, how many. Very, very wide, very sound, and he was a very good figure, I think, in a variety of ways. And we need more people like that embody a tradition, really. Sorry. That
Oh, I think that's really interesting. I haven't read that, and I'd love if you could send me the name of that, so
Yes,
I could look it up. But
I shall. The bloat, in fact, it was used as a reading. Two people read it out, and it worked extremely well. It worked extremely well. So I don't want to hog your present. Would anyone else who hasn't said anything like to? Ben, you have your hand. Please go ahead, sir.
Yes, I just want to ask a question on the subject of Reconstructionism. So you've spoken about the broken chain of initiation, and I was thinking of how this can be approached, and what came to mind was sort of Wiccan and New Age have an approach, or something that I've noticed is they will. You for instance mentioned the use of physical locations, lakes, bodies of water, perhaps things from nature, flora and fauna, rocks. They would maybe approach it in an academic way and say, well, one should look or study the alchemical associations or an astrological from there to say, for instance, that this rock is of Odin or it is of Mars and so on. Would that be a form of false knowledge, or is your attitude to veer towards pure intuition, so thinking with one's blood?
I'm not quite sure I understood the question. So you mean, can you restate the question?
So to restate the question, you were talking earlier about the importance of seeking knowledge, right? I think to seek knowledge, to understand something, makes it far better to understand the metaphysical nature of things. Is knowledge the best way to better understand and connect with the divine? Or do you feel that physical practice and physical experience, that it's more purely on level?
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I know I understood what you meant. I think it's a physical action inspired by and informed by knowledge is the best thing. You don't have to choose either or. And I think it's very good to immerse yourself in knowledge, as established knowledge, which is reliable on some level, as much as possible. But you do have to, I spoke about this in my talk. I think you do have to sort of create a space where that something can arrive. And it doesn't arrive just by talking about it or reading about it. You have to sort of create an experience as a human being where the divinities can start speaking to you. And I think that is very important. And there's a multitude of ways where we can do that. But I think it's very important that we do that, and that we conduct these rituals is very important. We have to engage with the mythic reality, both, you know, on a knowledge level, but also on a spiritual level, on a real experiential level. This is why I said I think a lot of pagans, you know, they believe in believing in gods, but they don't actually, they don't have an experience of the gods. And I think you have to make certain actions if you wish the gods to manifest themselves. It is not easy.
Absolutely, yeah. One has to devote a certain amount of time to, as you said, to just clear a space in one's life, and to await their rival, and just not try and get in the way. But one does have to make a little space and make a little commitment, which is a kind of mini sacrifice, a sacrifice of the most valuable thing we have, our time. Doesn't need to be much. 9 minutes a day, just to open oneself up to the experience. Michael, did you want to ask a question? Did I see your hand? No, perhaps I didn't. Okay. Anthony, wonderful. Please go ahead. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Stead. Firstly, Aki, much appreciation for a very thought-provoking commentary on so many issues. I'd like to ask a question, really looking at your extensive travels and research and direct lived experience. Aki, I'm interested in how you've experienced further. That is the very elemental, direct human-to-human emotionally fraught, emotionally charged connection to the heart that can be, in a sense, irrational, but is also very evocative of that ancestral knowledge that you mentioned, which Jung would refer to as archetypal, perhaps, but it's clearly a common bond which we share from our lineage. And I know, Aki, your emphasis on lineage, I very much appreciate that approach to faith. Look, have you got a comment to make on that religious fervor, how you've experienced it? Where is there a context for it within a framework which, of course, incorporates ritual and meditation, rather more passive aspects of religion? Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, it's a rather wide question. I don't know quite how to answer this, but I mean, yes, I have sought a sort of personal connection to the gods. I have wanted to experience these things as a reality, not just in some sort of abstract philosophical sense, but in living reality, to be touched, you know, by the divinities. And I think all those things that I mentioned in my talk, you know, different ways by which you can sort of call them, they do manifest themselves. And another thing is, I think there are places of power. I think there are places by which, if you go there and you do the correct things, I think something might open up for you. When I was in Old Uppsala, I had this dream of the god Frey many years ago, 20 years ago. And in the dream, I didn't even realize who this god was. And I woke up from this dream and I realized shortly who it was. And I started immersing myself into these myths. And I realized that this god was sort of expressing everything that I was lacking in my life. He was sort of pointing to all the things that I was experiencing. And when I got to go to the mound of Frey in Old Uppsala, as it's called, one of the god mounds of Old Uppsala, something did happen to me, like something opened up which wasn't normal. And I have to say, I mean, this kind of stuff isn't sort of normal to me. And I always think it's a problem when people, when people speak about personal experiences they've had with things, it's very hard to relate to for many people. And you very easily think that a person is deluded or something. But I'm saying this as a caveat because I don't necessarily have these experiences like often or all the time. But I've had a few experiences which have had a massive significance for my life, and that for the positive, I might add. And the thing that I discovered in Old Uppsala was like there was an aspect of my soul that bloomed. There was this ecstasy, this God drunkenness, which just suddenly emerged. And I haven't experienced that many times in many places. So I don't know if that answers your question, but this is all of those things that which I write about in this new book, is all of these ways as which we might call upon the divine to manifest itself, and the ways in which I experienced that it manifested itself, which is always doesn't happen. You know, sometimes the gods are very silent.
I just
yes, thank you, Aki, and yes, I feel you've answered my questions very well. The idea of God drunkenness, I rather like that analogy. It does evoke that intoxication aspect to religious faith, and I hope that we all discover some aspect of that in our travels and experience, and perhaps bring that home, because I feel it's an aspect which is sometimes lacking, and sometimes we need real passion and excitement in our faith, and
I think
to be a little bit too laid back can be lacking in that real passion. But thank you very much, Aki. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Can I just interject here, Stead, just to say that I had exactly the same experience when I went to Kumla, Uppsala, I think it was 1998. Exactly the same experience as Aki had.
Well, that seems to recommend it, yeah, and I think that is a good thing. We should maybe visit places and just open ourselves up to whatever the places have to speak to us. I think that's important. Robert, Peter, Ryan, any questions, or Vladimir, Mick, Corbin?
Yeah, I've got a question, Stead.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in the power that places have and possess. And there's a scientist, Rupert Sheldrake, who has this concept of morphic resonance. And to sort of just expand upon it slightly, that places have memories, and that when we visit a place, we can tune into the memory, not just of the place, but of everybody else who's previously visited that place for ritual purposes. I mean, I've experienced this myself visiting stone circles in the Peak District, and then places closer to home in Lincolnshire, quite powerful experiences, and a sense of moving out of present time and into a space which exists independent of the past, the present and the future, a sort of timeless, sacred space. And I was just wondering what your view is on that particular aspect of the power of places.
Yes, I've heard of was it Rupert Sheldrake?
Rupert Sheldrake, yes.
Yes. I've heard of his things. I'm not that familiar, so I could comment on his theories in particular. But I find what you expressed very interesting and very reasonable, and that seems to be the way that it goes. And if you look at, I mean, here we can take the example of India. In India, the landscape is dotted with temples. And the temples are often in the place where there already was some sort of landmark. And I think not every place is the same. There are sort of qualities and personalities in nature which manifest as different kind of places. There's a reason why our ancestors built sacred sites where they did. It wasn't a random occurrence. So these were, for various reasons, places of power, which they could already feel were places of power, and that these sacred sites were erected there. And of course, then the history of those places sort of adds to the power of those places. And yeah, I think it is. Some of these places are like living beings. You go there and you can get very touched by them in a very sort of direct way, where your thinking really doesn't have much to do with it, or your faith in them or anything. And mind you, I sort of try to be, healthily skeptical about my own experiences and things. I'm not a true believer by nature. I'm more of a, I try to be open to things, but I'm not. I don't. I also understand that I might be deluded. but there are, you know, experiences and places you go to, like I write about Montségur, the castle of Montségur in this book, which is the Cathar sort of stronghold in the Pyrenean mountains of France. And going up to that place and walking through this sort of portal that there is in the castle, I just burst into tears. And I didn't have any feeling of sadness or anything like that. It was just, it was the power of the place just really overtook me. And I do think that there is something to that. And as humans, we're drawn to these places. And what you said about the timeless, I think that's exactly what we connect with in these places, and what we should connect with also in all of our rituals. The rituals are engagement with mythic reality, which is beyond time. You know, we as human beings are bound by time, but when we enter that ritual space, we're sort of entering the space and time of the gods, which isn't bound by time in the same way. And I think engaging in pilgrimages to sacred sites and in rituals in just the sacred localities where you live, both of these are ways to connect with that timeless dimension which you mentioned.
I mean, it's interesting that I live in Lincoln. I visit Lincoln Cathedral, obviously, you know, a place of Christian worship. But when I enter that space, I'm not connecting with, you know, the Christian aspects of that place. In one sense, I'm connecting with the power of the place that existed before the cathedral was built. And so when you explore the cathedral, you can find sort of references to, you know, ancient pagan traditions, for example, the Green Man. And for example, Lincoln Cathedral, in the choir stalls, if you lift up the seats of the choir stalls, you can see these carvings of green men, which are sort of hidden. So it's, you know, even these, you know, medieval places of Christian worship, you know, are really become portals, you know, to accessing even more ancient, you know, spiritual traditions.
Well, the Romans, you know, used to have in their religions the concept of the genius loci, the spirit of the place, the guardian spirit, and that's exactly in the same way that Indians have spirits of places, of holy places, and then I think in Europe we have spirits of places. They are, if you go to, for instance, a sacred spring in Finland, it's going to be connected to a specific divinity or spirit. So it's good to know who you're invoking or toasting to when you go there, you know.
I mean, just on a, you know, final point. So, for example, in Lincolnshire, up on the Lincolnshire Wolds, there's a spring which has got the place name as Love's Well. You know, so obviously they were connecting with, you know, an ancient god. And then I think it's in the last 20 years, individuals have started to visit the well, to the spring, and, you know, to tie bits of fabric onto the branches of the trees. And in one sense, they've started to regenerate the power of that place and rediscover that place and give it a more spiritual significance, which it may have lost for maybe the last century. You know, so it's about this continual regeneration and rediscovery of places and reinvention of places. And then by doing that, you invigorate the spirituality surrounding that place, and then connect with the very ancient sources of that place in, millennia ago. But thanks for your perspective on that. Really,
thank you. It was a really interesting comment you made.
Thanks so much. I think Peter would like to ask a question. Michael, you've got to go.
Yeah.
Did you have your hand up? Did you have your hand up to ask a point, mate? If you've got to go.
Are you talking to me or?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
All right. Let me just say on the. All right. Two things. I do have to go, but on the idea of the sacred place. Robert Corrigan refers to places like Delphi and Stonehenge and so forth as places of semiotic plenitude, which it's a wonderful expression. And of course, these exist everywhere. Some places are, of course, more known or more celebrated. And by celebration, it comes from a Latin term, which ultimately means that people have come to this place. So the more celebrated a place is, the more people ultimately over time have passed through it. And that keeps augmenting the charge of the place. So I think when you're talking about nature and connecting with nature, these particular, you always could find a special tree or something in your own immediate area with which to locate or to resonate with. But I think in a way, Vivian Crowley, she of course was referring to Wicca, but I think it's equally applicable to any of our pagan traditions. She said, as long as you have a basic resonance with nature, with the natural, and then you celebrate your particular festivals of your tradition, she said, over time, these secrets or these knowledges or whatever is that's embedded in them will gradually unfold to you. And so I think it's the practice, and it's the practice with both nature, but working both with the geographic and also the mythical. And over time, they speak to you, and the gods speak through these things to us. So, anyway, I enjoyed Aki's talk very, very much, and I'll say goodbye.
Thanks very much, Michael. Appreciate your contributions as always. Cheers. Thank you. Peter, please.
Hi, Stead. Hello, everyone.
Are you in Greece, by the way?
Bulgaria now. I'm with the Bulgarian gods at the moment. So a quick question is simply in respect to gods, in respect to how you imagine or experience gods. How much would you say that they're specific persons? How much would you say that in terms of your experience and how you conceive them? How much would you say that they're physical? So physical, personal. You're saying, I think it's a good point to say that there is a tradition of the intellectual side in respect to how you perceive godhood and how you perceive a divinity. But in respect to the gods, how do you see them? How do you see them as being personal and physical? How would you identify those concepts with them from your perspective? That would be extremely interesting to me from your experience and obvious knowledge.
Thank you, Peter. As Aki, you might not know, Peter is an Aristotle scholar, so he's quite familiar with that particular view of the gods.
Very hard question, of course, very difficult, but very necessary question. I think that the gods are our way to approach the supreme reality. We cannot sort of approach, the Indians call it the unknowable immensity or the absolute. And we cannot really, it's very difficult for us as human beings to comprehend that. But we can approach the unknowable immensity by its manifold, numerous manifestations. And these manifestations are these gods. So when you are engaging with a god, you are, in a way, engaging with the one or the absolute or the supreme reality, because it is an aspect of that. It is I would say it's like a personality that you can interact with, but I wouldn't say it's a physical thing. I think it has an impact on the physical realm, obviously, but I don't think it's anything that we need to think of in this sort of too simplistic of terms. But I think they're personalities of the god.
Right, so they're more like natural forces and not symbols.
No, and not I wouldn't even call them natural forces, because how can you have a relationship based on love? And reciprocity with the natural force. You know, you can sort of have a relationship with something you think has consciousness and personality and spirit, and that is somehow receptive to the communication that you are offering them.
So they are a divine person, but that what you want to say that you shouldn't conflate that with the human person that we effectively normally engage with. So it's a divine personhood that actually represents a certain aspect of being. Yeah?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay.
And of course, aspects of God can also sort of be made manifest in human beings, where you can. This is also an idea that they have in India, that you can sort of worship the divine, or, for instance, you can worship the goddess in your wife, as Shakti as your wife, yeah. And you should revere your partner in that way. And that there are these ways where divinity manifests in human beings, and they can also, like, for brief periods of time, be overtaken by the god, this god drunkenness, which you spoke of earlier.
Good, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to make sure these meetings don't go over 2 hours, and we're coming up to the end of our time. But I wondered if, as a quick last question, Vladimir or Mick or Co, I don't know who you are, but what wanted to ask a question. If and those who haven't, perhaps one very quick question I would ask personally is, how should we relate to our Christian heritage in terms of, because it's still a major part of who we are. That Europe has been a Christian country, and there were so many churches and these resonant places, as Robert was alluding to.
That it's very funny you ask, because I was just going to make an extra point about Christianity here, because we've been sort of many people have made comments sort of relating to Christianity or something like that, and I think it's an important issue. I'm not really anti-Christian in the sense. I've really tried in this book to find what is valuable or what is important in Christianity, because the Europe and the West is built on a tension between Christianity and paganism. These two streams are kind of the underlying river of the whole culture of Europe. And of course, it's a stream, these two streams have been warring with each other, but they've also been coexisting. You know, historically speaking, paganism and Christianity have coexisted at periods of time extensively. And so I don't want to, although I consider myself some sort of pagan, although that word is sometimes giving me problems, but I do not want to come off as sort of anti-Christian in a way. I've really tried in this book to appreciate the good aspects of Christianity, which I think actually are pagan aspects. The holidays, especially the sacred times of Christianity, the idea of saints, and the idea that we have these sort of lesser beings which we can revere. Many aspects of Christianity are essentially pagan aspects of Christianity. They're built on pagan foundations or pagan concepts, and so I've tried to really give a fair viewing of it. And of course, you cannot explore Holy Europe without exploring Christianity and its legacy and its dilemmas and its future. And so I think that we need to be sensible about these things and not too absolute. We can accept Christianity. My family is nominally Christian. A lot of people are Christian around me. This is a nominally Christian culture. So we have to sort of work with what we have, and we can appreciate the knowledge of these things on an esoteric level also, that there are aspects to Christianity which are very pagan and agreeable, I would say. And perhaps we need to come to a reconciliation with these two streams somehow.
Yeah, I think that's very, very wise. Living in the United Kingdom, there is a national religion, and the head of state is the head of the Church of England. And although this isn't my religion, I like the idea of the state having a connection like that with the spiritual realm, really, as things used to be in the past. The Roman state was necessarily a religious entity, and the two things couldn't really be separated, really. And I think I like that rather than the liberal view that everyone can do what he or she wants, I think. But now, I mean, this has been a wonderful evening. I very much appreciate everything you've said and the questions and how you've answered them. But I think as we're coming up to 8 o'clock, I think it's time to draw events to an end. And Aki, thank you, and I thank everyone for participating, because it's the energy of the participants as well which helps move things forward and stimulates thought, and it's a very good thing to attend anything like this. I will just close the meeting. I should say a few words, and then I should blow the candle out. Maltuge humiskunsame azer at queldi skal dagloefa. Kono prende maki roinde moi givine ise bekemur oil the twitters och at not skal kvöld loefa. Blessed gods of our peoples and lands, at evening shall one praise the day, and at night shall one praise the evening. We offer thanks for what we've profited by, and for what we have found pleasure in. Sigurd Idor, Sigurd Idor, Sigurd Os, Sigurd Os. Frieder Idor, Frieder Idor, Frieder Os, Frieder Os, Frieder Os. Many thanks again to everyone, especially for people maybe getting tuning in at not very convenient hours, such as Anthony in Australia. So it's very good to have you. Unfortunately, AJ from Arizona, Mick, you're familiar with AJ, of course, aren't you?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. He had to teach now, otherwise he was looking forward to coming on, but we'll have him as a speaker in the future, because he's a really top guy. All right,
can I say thank you to everyone who made such difficult and challenging and good questions, and it's very fruitful for me to engage with a group of such high quality, and not to be just asked simple questions, but actually have challenging questions put forth, because I think we need challenging questions and
absolutely
delving deep. So thank you, everyone.
Aki, maybe when the book is finally out in English, perhaps you would care to come back and maybe you'd have had some more thoughts at that point. Maybe in a few months' time, it might be nice to see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to.
Excellent. All right, then I wish everyone a very, very, very good evening. And the bloats that we do online, that will be on the 20th of December at noon. And Aki, I'll be in touch with you, because I'd like to use the painting you speak of, because we'll be looking at the creation of fire, and that's that's a really important thing. So that will be good. And I shall send you a link to the Ezra Pound piece. All right,
wonderful.
Then. Good night, everyone. Take care.
Good to see Tony again. So,
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.